The Peakhurst-Lugarno district on Sydney's southern fringe is one of the city's growing suburban localities. It has a small industrial area at its northern end, but its main interest is residential housing. The housing spreads fairly closely over a large area round the Peakhurst centre. And it thins out towards the more recently developed region of Lugarno at its southern extremity. To the local Anglicans, who were served by two small churches, the area had for some years been a provisional parish in the charge of a curate. The curate administered his charge from Holy Trinity Church in Forest Road, Peakhurst. Here, on Sunday the 20th of October 1974, parishioners and visitors assembled, together with a number of clergy, for a special service. This service was presided over by the Archbishop of Sydney, the Most Reverend Dr. Marcus Loane. The Governor of New South Wales, Sir Roden Cutler, accompanied by Lady Cutler, also attended the service, which marked the elevation of the curacy to the full status of an Anglican parish, together with the licensing of the Reverend Len Abbott as its first rector. The parish lies in the southwest corner of the Hurstville municipality. It extends from Peakhurst along the Lugarno Peninsula to the Georges River. Through its full length runs the Forest Road, which, except for some slight deviations, was previously part of the old Illawarra Road, designed by Sir Thomas Mitchell, Surveyor General and noted explorer, and built about 1845. Its ferry at Lugarno provided the first, and for some years the only, vehicle crossing on the Georges River. First, a tiny hand-operated punt, and finally, a substantial diesel craft. The ferry plied across the river at this spot for 131 years, until superseded by a bridge a little further up the river. The name Forest Road reminds us of the unspoiled bushland which once covered the whole of the Georges River region. And of the stands of rich timber, such as that which lay between the sites of Kingsgrove and Peakhurst, and came to be known as Gannon's Forest, where Gannon's village became the nucleus of modern Hurstville. It was the quality and abundance of forest trees that attracted the region's first settlers. They were the timber getters who lived in slab-walled, bark-roofed huts until replaced by homes of weatherboard and shingles. The Peakhurst area was settled first, being closest to the Sydney track via the bark huts, now Enfield. Cook's River had not then been bridged. The timber was hauled to Sydney, largely for the internal structure of the city's waterfront warehouses, which were mostly built with exterior walls of stone. The timber getters also supplied fine turpentine piles for the city's wharves. A small stand of these valuable turpentine trees, which have great resistance to white ants and marine borers, can still be seen in Gannon's Park at South Peakhurst. Later, many hand-trimmed sleepers were cut for the railways. In the early days, local diversion was provided by sly grog shanties, which were popular gathering places for young and old, especially on Sundays. The liquor was made in stills in the bush across the river, where running water was available. Much of the product found its way to Sydney. Among the shanty patrons were many ex-convicts called lags, who made a fair living as charcoal burners. The charcoal had a ready market, much of it as forge fuel for Sydney's many blacksmiths. Some of the shanties staged cockfights as a weekend sporting attraction, accompanied by much gambling and drinking. The more stable settlers felt the need for a Christian ministry to provide a better influence, especially for the children. In 1856, at this spot, on what is now the Forest Road, the area's first Christian church appeared. It was a small Wesleyan chapel built of weatherboards on stone supports and roofed with shingles. John Peake, a boat builder by trade, who settled here in 1853 and made his home available for worship, donated the land, and he also gave the doorstep of his home for a foundation stone. When a new chapel was built in Forest Road, near Bonds Road in 1879, the doorstep foundation stone was transferred to the front of its porch, now next to the present Methodist church. Peake's home stood on the 10-acre block from which he had donated the chapel site. This land, after changing hands several times, is now being developed for the Benevolent Society. A fitting destiny for the site of the district's first Christian church. Peake's name is perpetuated in Peakhurst, which can mean Peak Wood or forest. A descendant, Mrs. Daisy Bell, whose parents were among the supporters of the first Anglican church at Peakhurst, represents the Peake family as a present member of Holy Trinity Church. The Peakhurst locality was originally part of the Anglican parish of Cook's River, which included the whole of the St. George district from 1838 to 1872. The parish church was St. Peter's, which eventually gave its name to that locality now known as St. Peter's. A slab church was built here in 1834. This present building dates from 1838, when it was erected entirely by free labour. At first, church attendance from the Georges River end was practically impossible. However, the Reverend Thomas Steele, first rector of Cook's River, often rode out on the rough bush tracks to visit settlers in the outlying parts. In 1856, St. George's, the church in the bush, was built at Hurstville as a branch of St. Peter's. But in 1872, it came under the new parish of St. Paul's Cogra, which then included the Georges River region. From the late 1870s, a bus ran between Hurstville Hotel and the city. However, the railway reached Hurstville in 1884, boosting settlement and the need for a bigger church. By this time, the forest had begun to give way to small farms and homes. In 1889, the old church, which now had to be propped up against the ravages of white ants and severe weathering, was replaced by a larger building of brick. This church was added to and improved over the years until it reached its present dimensions in 1932. Its district, still including the Peakhurst locality, had become a separate parish in 1905. Prior to 1916, the ministry at Hurstville conducted Anglican services in the School of Arts at Peakhurst, which had been opened in 1909. It's said that the Reverend Dixon Hudson often walked the considerable distance from St George's Rectory for the purpose. Suburban growth had been continuous at Penshurst and Mortdale since the opening of stations at those centres in the 80s and 90s. This growth was now being reflected in the Peakhurst district. From 1904, Bennett's bus had run regular services between Penshurst Station and Peakhurst Post Office. The region now had many small scattered farms, such as dairies, chicken runs, piggeries and orchards, of which the Peakhurst locality had its share. Tall trees were still to be seen, but homes and farms were steadily pushing them back. In 1916, 60 years after the first Wesleyan chapel had appeared at Peakhurst, Dean Talbot laid the foundation stone of its first Anglican church, Holy Trinity in Forest Road. On completion, the church lacked the sanctuary and vestries which were added later. At that time, roads generally were bad, and at Peakhurst, wet weather made church attendance difficult. However, a start was shortly made to form up and metal at least the Forest Road. In 1924, the Hurstville parish was divided, and the Peakhurst-Lugarno area became a part of the parish of St John's Church, Penshurst. From St John's, it was serviced by a curate, as were many branch churches in various parishes. Over the years, the replacement of farms by continuing housing development brought increased demands on the church. This was accentuated to some extent by the opening of the East Hills Railway in 1931. In 1952, the Peakhurst-Lugarno area became linked with Riverwood and Narwee on the East Hills line to form a provisional district with its own ministry. This was split up in 1958, and the Peakhurst-Lugarno portion became a separate provisional parish. The Reverend Mapson Williams, a former curate at Penshurst and Riverwood, was appointed curate in charge. To house the curate, a small rectory was built next to the church at Peakhurst. During this ministry, a fine brick parish hall was opened in the church grounds. In 1963, the Reverend Kelvin Tutt, who had recently arrived from New Zealand, became curate in charge. About this time, the second Billy Graham crusade and a local baby boom had quickened church life, again bringing need for more accommodation. In 1968, the Christian Education Centre was added in the grounds of Holy Trinity Church. It provided additional spacious sections for Sunday school and kindergarten, as well as accommodation to meet the growing needs of numerous church functions. The Reverend Len Abbott became the minister in 1974. He had previously been chaplain to the Church of England Grammar School at North Sydney, better known as Shaw. Extensions to the rectory at Peakhurst had been completed, making it a reasonably comfortable residence and a valuable asset to the church property. At the Lugarno end of the parish, efforts to start a branch church had extended over some years. In the 30s, Mr. Thomas Cross, father of a later Georges River MLA, had donated some land for the purpose. A reminder of Thomas Cross is a memorial which he erected at an intersection on the Forest Road at Lugarno to a son who died on active service. The land he gave comprised 2 blocks on the old Forest Road. However, this land remained unused for some years. Meanwhile, in 1940, the Baptist ministry opened the first church to appear in the Lugarno area. It stood on land facing the new Forest Road and adjoining the blocks donated by Mr. Cross to the Church of England. In 1952, an Anglican Sunday school was commenced in the Lugarno Progress Hall, which then stood on this site in Limekiln Road. Not far from the corner where the Forest Road descends to the river. When the Baptists moved to a new church further north on the Forest Road, the Anglicans purchased the site, which had been vacated. Thus, they provided a composite area fronting both the old and new Forest Roads. On it, a small hall was placed for temporary use. This hall was a decrepit structure brought from Riverwood. Later, a small wooden church was built facing the old Forest Road. This wooden church was opened in 1959 as St. Stephen's by Bishop Loane, now Archbishop. In 1964, a commodious brick hall was built next to the church, but after a time, this proved inadequate. Sunday school attendance eventually overflowed into rooms lent by the nearby public school. To deal with this, work commenced in 1973 on the erection of a modern-style brick hall behind the church and on the site of the Riverwood Hall. On completion of the attractively designed building, it was decided to make this the church. In addition to its pleasing interior, the new hall was more spacious than the existing church building and, in other ways, quite suitable for services. The wooden church was then to become available for the required additional Sunday school accommodation. The rest of the land on the new Forest Road frontage provides car parking space until new building needs arise. The parish of Peakhurst-Lugarno is now well organised to meet the present needs of Anglicans in this expanding area. Holy Trinity Church runs a small bus for parish work, such as collecting Sunday school children from and returning them to their scattered homes in the Peakhurst section. Under a willing band of teachers, the Sunday schools at both centres function as one of the most important commitments of the parish. Both churches have groups of the Church of England Boys Society and the Girls Friendly Society, which follow vigorous programs of interesting activities in addition to attending periodical church parades. Ready hands are always available to help with fetes and other facets of church life. Such groups as the Women's Guild, Mothers Union and Homemakers Fellowship, which provide a field of friendly social interest for the parish ladies, always lend their help together with other parishioners on these occasions. The wardens and members of the church committees besides administering the parish affairs, give much personal service towards the maintenance of church property and the conduct of parish functions. Dr. Peter O'Brien of Moore Theological College is at present engaged to assist the rector on Sundays. With these factors of organisation and effort contributing to an effective ministry, the parish is well fitted for its new status. At Holy Trinity Church, the governor is received by the rector and the archbishop, and he meets the assembled clergy. The church officers and their wives are presented. The governor has a ready word for others, especially the children who've turned up in force. The Reverend Len Abbott conducts the service. The church is filled, and the service is relayed by television to the adjacent parish hall. The hall is filled to capacity by the overflow congregation. The assembly here is considerably larger than that accommodated in the church. The Reverend Mapson Williams reads the first lesson. The governor reads the second lesson. The Archbishop proclaims the new parish and delivers the occasional address. At the conclusion of the service, the governor and Lady Cutler leave the church. Before departing, however, they have some final words with clergy and parishioners. The remaining parishioners and visitors repair to the Christian Education Hall for lunch. Here, the Archbishop and other visiting clergy are special guests of the parish. In the afternoon, the action moves to Lugarno for the opening of the new hall at St. Stephen's Church. The hall is already filled to receive the Archbishop. With traditional ceremony, the Archbishop makes his formal entry. The large overflow congregation is assembled outside the open doorway through which the service can be heard. Archdeacon Cameron assists with the service. The Archbishop dedicates the hall as St. Stephen's Church and delivers his address. A warden welcomes the visitors and explains the building finance. At the conclusion of proceedings, the rector escorts the Archbishop and Archdeacon Cameron back to Peakhurst, leaving the assemblage to enjoy a cup of tea to round off a day of memorable happenings. Thus, the Anglican establishment at Peakhurst-Lugarno has reached its maturity, as it takes its place among the many Anglican parishes that now occupy the area that was once the parish of Cook's River. It has come through some lean and difficult times with a fair measure of success. But it still faces the challenge of future community growth in a world whose social trends seem bent on eroding many of the ancient concepts of human grace and dignity. Just as human intrusion has steadily eroded the blaze of wildflowers from the once virgin bushland that swept down to the quiet waters of the Georges River.